he always, he always said it was his masterwork, and he was very proud of it when he produced it. Now, the way he works is part of the enigma of Revelations of Mind, because Rinpoche doesn't write English. And as I say, he speaks English, but the way the Tibetan language is very different from Latin. It doesn't have the same grammatical forms. So his spoken English is often back to front, verbs in the wrong place, and all kinds of issues like that. But of course, he communicates extremely forcefully. And so what people do is they write down what he's saying, and you get this very kind of extraordinary word salad, which has to be edited into text. And he decided to transmit what he felt was this masterwork that had been obviously brewing up in him for some years in about 2008. And between 2008 and 2011, more or less, 10, 11, like that. Oh, God, I knew this would happen. Sorry. Darling, I'm on the line here. I'm going to have to phone you later. Forgive me. My beloved wife has incredible timing when it comes to anything like this. Put it on mute. Okay. So he transmitted this word salad over a whole series of seminar type meetings with some of his senior students. He hasn't got many. He's only got about 40, I should think. And he produced this extraordinary collection of mini essays, which were going in a direction, but be honest with you, I don't think the students really understood where it was going. And then a whole process of editing occurred. I was one of the editorial team. There were actually 3 separate edits made of it, until eventually the text finalized in the form that it is now, Revelations of Mind. And he then, he bought a building in downtown Berkeley, which we call Dharma College, which is right opposite Berkeley Library. And he said to the original faculty of 5 of us, he said, guys, I want you to teach Revelations of Mind here. Now, at this point, the book wasn't even published. And this is a 32,000 square foot building. We're going to go, what? Are you serious? And he said, yeah, this is going to be a center of Revelations. Okay. So we all start teaching it. And it's extremely difficult because we really didn't understand what the book was about, really. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But anyway, so I was one of the original faculty. And over the years, originally we tried to take extracts from it to make it more palatable. But I began to realize that that was mistaken. And the book had an underlying logic that was destroyed by extracting from it. And so eventually I started teaching it right through, everything, including the prefaces and postscripts and subscripts, the whole thing, every word on the page. And I had a student body then, I did twice right through with a group. And in both cases, somebody decided to transcribe it. So I landed up with 2 transcripts, which were essentially verbatim transcripts of what I'd said in class, which of course included the entirety of the book. So I thought, okay, I'll edit the transcripts into a commentary. And that's what happened. And although the editing process cleaned up the English and occasionally changed some of the things that were said, nonetheless, the bones of Searcher is essentially composite of 2 transcribed series of classes, each one of which took 2 years to do. So, I used to do a chapter a week, and it's 68 chapters. So you can imagine that takes about 2 years to do. So it took 4 years really to collect the transcripts, another couple of years to edit them into a text. Now, the other thing about me is that I used to run an esoteric school. This was in between going to India and starting my laboratory. For a period, I was lecturing in an esoteric school in London, which was a very interesting experience. And I also studied tarot and the Western esoteric tradition. And it gave me a keen intuition about something I think is extremely relevant to Revelations. Namely, that Western culture also had a tradition like this, that it lost. And it lost it because of in the Counter-Reformation, essentially, it was lost. And all the lineages were broken. There are no authentic Western lineages left. But if you go to medieval culture, you see a totally different worldview from the one we now have. One far more consonant with the kind of worldview that the Tibetans got and kept. And so in many ways, what we're doing in Revelations as a project is bringing forward a position that Western culture has lost. Now, I call this position absolute subjectivity. Now, we have in our culture a very strange phenomenon. Although our inferential knowledge base grows exponentially, it's based upon a Galilean suspicion of subjectivity. So our conventional knowledge base says that your own experience is irrelevant to knowledge. It is not knowledge. It can only be used to generate knowledge, which must always be couched objectively. And this profound alienation runs through Western culture like, the letters in Brighton Rock, as we say in the UK. And it causes a strange phenomenon, which is every 2 or 3 generations, you get a rebellion against it. And the rise of people who say, I believe, and because I believe, I am right. We're seeing it at the moment. It normally manifests in something akin to fascism. And what happens is leaders arise who say, look, guys, forget all this experts, elites, forget all these people with their objective truths. What I believe is my right. And that's all that matters. And of course, it's very attractive because it addresses a deep problem in our culture, namely it addresses self-alienation. And as crazy as the anti-vaxxers and, all the rest of them are, they have at least got their own beliefs and they feel very happy about it. Whereas sadly, most liberal folk are alienated from their own experience in a very deep way because they require an external knowledge book to tell them what is right and what is wrong. Of course, again, caricatures by political correctness, etc. Now, this is a problem that goes way back. And the question is, can we develop subjectivity to make it reliable? If we could, what would it reveal? Now, of course, what's happened in the last 30 years is a reappraisal of a highly subjective activity, namely meditation, where suddenly, to the great surprise, I might say, of people back in the 70s when this research began, it turns out that meditation has tangible benefits. Now, that goes against the grain of this idea that subjective experience is irrelevant. It means that subjective experience could be actually valuable. Now, this, of course, is a direct pointer into the main subject matter of Revelations of Mind. Namely, what is our experience? Can we make sense of our experience as experience? Not 101 Ways to Be Happy, written by some neurophysiologist based upon experiments on monkeys. No, what can we make ourselves without someone else telling us our own right? And this is what the central project of Revelations of Mind is about. And what's interesting about Revelations is that it points to something profound, which you guys have intuited already, which is that there are 2 elements to our cognitive process, one of which is mechanical, but the other of which is not. And the confusion that we suffer from, and the reason why our subjectivity is unreliable, is because of our confusion about these 2 elements of our experience. And the mechanical part of our experience of course, is studied extensively by neurophysiology and neuroanatomy and psychology and all the rest of it. And it's quite clear that a major element of what we experience is a construct. And it is manipulable. And indeed, of course, there's now an industry, the whole social media industry, that does exactly manipulate it. And it is mechanical, it's linguistically based. Now, this comes as no surprise to Buddhist folk who are well educated, because there was a major school of Indian Buddhism started in the 4th century called the Yogacara school, which posited exactly that. In fact, there is a huge literature within the Yogacara school of extremely sophisticated analysis about how language makes the world. And so, whereas the great Ludwig Wittgenstein stumbled upon it with his wonderful quote about the aim of philosophy, the honest truth is this had been known for 1600 years or more. And it's just completely unrecognized by Western culture. So Revelations of Mind is a Yogacharan text. It's attempting to provide insight which can guide us as the user into an understanding of the mechanical element of our cognition, and thereby reveal what it is not. Now, this is an extremely important concept. You see, if our cognition, our conceptuality, our linguistic structures are mechanical, they can never understand themselves. However, we all have a faculty of insight, which we can experience very easily. But whenever we try and express it, we re-evoke the very mechanical, linguistically based construct which we're trying to understand. So we land up in a loop where we don't seem to be able to escape the language box in which we're embedded. And this loop means that introspection, as understood in the West post the Reformation, is clearly non-effective in understanding the mind. And indeed, schools of introspectionism that have occasionally sprung up in Western culture, the most recently after the work of, in the sort of early 20th century, after William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, all fail. Because introspectionism, because it's linguistically based, merely replicates the thing it's trying to understand and doesn't penetrate it. But if you go back into early medieval culture, for example, I can quote you something about this. For example, Nicholas Erasmi, the physicist, court physicist to King Philip of France in the 12th, 13th century, I forget, right about that date, wrote a masterwork on mechanics. And this text has 3 paradigmatic examples that are analyzed. The first is the rolling of a ball down an inclined plane. Well, that's mechanics, we get that. The second is the ripening of an apple. And the third is the movement of grace in the heart. I mean, we have lost something. We've lost something. It's almost impossible for us to comprehend how a mechanist could write that and be not just some crazy guy living in a tree, be a really big man in the culture. That's what we have lost. Now, the unique feature of Buddhist culture is its love of learning and analysis. You know, famously, the Buddha taught causes. And so of all the world religions, uniquely among the world religions, Buddhism is interested in perception, and it's interested in how to understand perception. So it's highly analytical. So we have in this extraordinary corpus that the Tibetans essentially translated into took across the mountains, a body of knowledge about how perception can be understood by you, your own perception, not someone else's, your own. And as I've said, what's happening is we're living in a period when psychology, neurophysiology, neuroanatomy, etc., are confirming the insights that these meditators have, many of which are in Revelations of Mind. So if you look at Revelations of Mind as a book, the first section, which you guys have just completed, chapters 1 to 11, are essentially a review of what Rinpoche calls the regime of mind. Now, this is a very good, wonderful metaphor that he has completely invented. So that is not Yogacharan. And I think it's incredible, the regime of mind. Because what he is pointing to is that the mechanical functioning of the linkage between percept and concept creates a regime, a structure that is all-encompassing. It develops because of evolutionary advantage. It's clearly very valuable to be able to link percept and concept in this way because you can learn from experience. You can remember previous examples of this particular percept and react to it rapidly rather than having to work out what it is. And so the regime of mind is the first thing. Most people, A, have no idea what the mind is, use the word the whole time but have never thought about it, and B, are very resistant to the idea it might be mechanical. Even though nowadays we are beginning to realize dimly that Google knows more about what we're going to do next than we do. People are coming around to the idea, and then they tend to say, oh, that means we're just a machine. No, it doesn't mean we're just a machine. But to really analyze that properly, I think Revelations of Mind stands on its own. I don't believe there is another book in print that has done such a thorough job of explaining how language and concept create structure in which percept is analyzed before we even recognize it. In fact, in our language, we have this term recognition, which is a folk memory of some process of world creation, which we no longer understand. And so what you've gone through, and I hope you've developed a bit of a taste for, is the fact that a major element of what we call the world is a construct which is made by us. Now, it's not to say there's no world. This is not making any ontological claim at all. It's merely saying that whatever the world is, all we experience is what comes in through the sense gates and our mind, the so-called 6 gates. There is no other form of experience. I don't care how many scientists you put in a row, it doesn't alter the fact there are only 6 sense gates, and all of them have them, and we have them as well. So if we don't understand how the 6 sense gates provide information, we are in a fundamental way ignorant, what Rinpoche calls misunderstanding. We don't understand something profound about our own incarnation. So there's only one Western philosopher who's ever raised this, Wittgenstein. Most Western philosophy is merely happy to continuously ornament whatever conceptual structure arises from the 6 sense gates. Very few philosophers have looked at the 6 sense gates. So that's the first section of Revelations. And you guys are about to enter the second. And the second looks at meditation, largely critically in the first few bits of it. So chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, they're kind of critical. And that's because mindfulness meditation, or vipassana, as it's mistakenly called, is essentially a denatured attempt to map meditation onto scientific materialism, with the idea that the meditator, through this process, sees the reality of their experience as if looking through a microscope. Now, this whole metaphor is a construct. It's a linguistic construct. So you can see the problem. you land up with a mindfulness meditation that just sees itself. It doesn't see anything else at all. And indeed, that's the criticism that Rinpoche has. People variously sleep on their cushion, either they just go into states of blankness, or they land up with a state of deep tension in which they're trying to catch the present moment, whatever the hell that is, and capture it as if you might get a flea in a bottle. And so there's a lot of critical comment. Then, and this is the point, Richard, you were pointing to, there is a very, very important moment. Is there a meditation object that we can select which might yield us useful insight if we were to concentrate on it? And the answer is yes, there is. And this again is Yogacharan completely. It's all in the ancient text. If we concentrate, if we turn our attention, having developed stability of mind, which is called shamatha, on how we validate what we think we know, we will find that that process of validation has phases. It's not a one-off. It's there in the language. Cognition, recognition. Oh, you cognize, then you recognize. That means that there's a gap. There's one and a two, a one and a two. If you could get to cognition rather than recognition, what would you see? You would then be seeing, I don't know, whatever it would be. It wouldn't be recognition, would it? Now, this has profound implications for knowledge, because it means that linguistically generated knowledge, which is entirely recognized in terms of words, is a second order knowledge based upon something else that is always invisible to it. Oh, you mean all the time we've been living in a thought bubble and we've been elaborating it with nuclear weapons when actually there's something else? Oh, that's a bit of a surprise. Now, this is what the rest of Revelations is about. It's about exploring that. Of course, it leads to a path, a yoga, to use the technical term, but it's a path or a yoga that is informed by the dangers of language, which bedevil all religions. Because unfortunately, even if you have a Christ or perhaps even a Muhammad, I'm not sure, but certainly a Christ, or Buddha or any great leader, often all their followers get are the words. And then they write them into books, and then you've got a word structure, and you've lost whatever the hell it was they were talking about, really. It's gone. And the wisdom tradition of Buddhism is unique in that it's self-correcting. That's to say, it takes the time to understand words themselves. Now, find me that in the Bible. It's words themselves to the prison we're in. And we need to embed that insight into perception itself to see how that is occurring and why we need words. I'm not suggesting that words are useless. They're highly useful. They're like a Swiss Army knife. They're incredible tools, but they cover up something else. And that something else is our birthright, our freedom, which indeed that wonderful poem from Rilke, that poem, it's just beautiful, 100% pointing to something else, and doing so precisely, I might add, which as you work through Revelations, you're going to be able to pass every line of that poem and see how it works. So it's not the case that Buddhist culture is unique in this regard. There have been occasional Western people, and I think a whole culture prior to the Counter-Reformation, that had this view. Now we live in a crisis, absolute crisis, in which we are on the brink of catastrophe, environmental and political. And so the other theme that runs through Revelations are these warnings saying, guys, you got to deal with this. If you don't deal with this self-alienation, which you educate your children into and informs both politics and technology, if you don't deal with this self-alienation, you are on a path to self-destruction. Because everybody is in a meaning mirror, a language mirror, in which they can't understand each other. And indeed, they're chasing after chimeras, which aren't real. They're just constructs. And so we live in incredibly dangerous times. And so there's a sense of urgency that also runs through Revelation. And this Tibetan Lama is saying, look, I'm going to spill the beans for real. I'm going to really tell you the way it is. I'm not going to dress this up. This is the way it is, guys. Get it into your heads. Understand that you construct a world. Understand how you construct a world. Understand what you could do if world construction was a tool you could use rather than a prison that limits what you see. What could you then do? And then get on with it. That's exactly what Revelations of Mind is about. And as I say, I think it's an extremely important book. Of course, it goes straight in the face of both religious sensibility and knowledge-based sensibility, because everybody thinks they know what they're talking about. They do not. That's the problem. How often have you heard a politician say, look, I'm so sorry, guys. Many of the problems that we suffer from are created by ourselves, the way we see the world. That's where the problem lies. You can't fix world poverty, gun violence, or anything else if you take them as real. The problem is that's what happens. People make up problems and then take them as real. So as a result, the problems just keep on coming back. I mean, anybody who's read Marcus Aurelius reads a modern man going, what is happening? 2,000 years ago, nothing is changing, but we're getting better and better weapons. And we're destroying the environment at the same time. So this is the problem we're addressing. So anyway, that's the background to Revelations of Mind. And in many ways, what we're trying to do at Dharma College is to take this agenda and find ways to make it palatable to an ever-increasing Western audience. And of course, it's taking time to get the language and work it out and find the right metaphor set. I think we're getting better at it, in fact. I do. It's taken a long time because our metaphysical structures in which we are embedded are very deep and they're pre-conscious to us. So they're hard to get at. And, so we veer off, we wander about. It's what the Buddhists call samsara. We're kind of trapped in a prison and we can't see the prison. We don't know what the prison is. Well, what Revelations is doing is pointing to what makes the prison work. And once you see it, you realize, wow, moment to moment to moment, I am constructing the world. And in that 200 milliseconds, which is approximately the time it takes, is the entirety of world culture. It's all in there because all of it then informs what I will do. And this is the thing that people don't realize. They think they're seeing reality here and now. They are not. Of course, we know this. I mean, we know there's a reaction time between what actually happens and what we think happens. We kind of know that, but nobody really adds up what that means. It means that we're never seeing the world. We're always seeing a display. What makes a display? We do. Do we understand it? No, we don't. Are we ignorant? Yes, we are. It's like that. It is so blindingly obvious when you actually get your head to it that it's surprising that it's not a major part of our education. But does it ever come up? No, it doesn't. And this is where we are as a culture. And as I say, it's the key issue that Revelations addresses. So I'm obviously delighted, and the questions that you've asked are right on the money. So I printed them out, and the second one is freeing ourselves through self-observation. There are two elements in our experience, one mechanical, but what is the other? Well, learning to look. Oh, it's a clock. Richard often refers to the mind's creating a kind of double exposure, a feedback loop. Yes, that's exactly it. We have an experience, and then we recognize that experience. Now, the interesting thing is, the me, the Richard Dixey, is also a recognition. We don't actually exist in the present moment. We remember ourselves. That's why we always say, I was there. We never say, I is there. Now, this is very interesting. And, I hope all of you have done this. It is very hard to get people to do this. Basically, as you are speaking, ask yourself, am I speaking? As you are speaking. People go, no, of course, I was speaking. No. I don't want you to say I was speaking. Are you speaking as you're speaking? Is there an I in there speaking? There isn't. The words are just coming out. Oh, that's interesting. So do you mean that my experience and the model I make of my experience are different? Yes, they are. The model I make of my experience contains an actor who's not present in the experience. The actor is a cognitive device that's used by the mind to constellate meaning, to make a narrative structure, to make sense of events. So suddenly one begins to get this intuition that we are truly in a Maya, a illusion structure. Not to say there's nothing. I'm not saying there's nothing. I'm just saying the model we have contains components that don't objectively exist. Now, this is extremely important insight. It has big consequences. So this is all part of the analysis that Revelations encourages us to undertake, using many, many, many metaphors to try and penetrate it. So
what you're talking about, Richard, reminds me of the man who lived for decades in his prison cell and, damned and cursed his imprisonment and everything else. And one day, after decades, leaned against the door of his prison cell and discovered it was not locked.
Yes.
It had never been locked. Yeah.
It's a bit like that, except for one problem with that metaphor. We take our prison with us. It's not, we can't escape this, because the we that escapes is the prison.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. So you see, unfortunately, we have a language set that talks about liberation, enlightenment, transformation, freedom, all these lovely words, but they all imply the problem they're trying to solve. You really start realizing, wow, this is subtle. So this is what Tarthanf Tulku realized, that Westerners were projecting on the Buddha story a hero who became liberated. But that hero is exactly the prisoner we're caught in. The hero is the problem. The heroic religious leader is an illusion. We're all thinking, oh, I'm going to make it heroically to heaven. What happens then? I'm in heaven. No, no way you're in heaven, mate. That's not going to happen. That's the thing. So
I can't be Siddhartha.
Huh?
I can't be Siddhartha. I have to be me.
You can't even be me.
Yeah.
What you find out is the me that you are is a useful tool. That's it. So all our learning, all our technology, all our experience is an ornament to something else, infinitely greater. So it's not that me doesn't exist. It's just that me is a tool, a piece of rigging, to use Alan's language. It's a piece of equipment that our cognitive structure creates. And learning how to go beyond it is a process that is a dance. And that's the dance of revelations of mind. It's a dance. Because we have to become familiar with what could be called knowing, not knowing. We have to become familiar with a means of it being in the world where we don't know what we're doing. The moment we know what we're doing, we're in the linguistic construct. So unfortunately, most people set out on a quest for self-enhancement or, enlightenment or whatever, as if they know what they're going for. That's why they'll never make it. The metaphor which you've just begun to study in Searcher is the Takla Makan. Go in, don't come out. And you go in and don't come out because you enter a desert which is literally a hall of mirrors, in which the very thing you're seeking to escape is all you can see. So you land up just going round in circles, seeing yourself, and going, I can't escape this thing. And indeed, I can't. That's the thing. So we have to find other means of motivation other than what we've been educated into and what we've learnt about. It's a totally radical path. And of course, this is the true aim of meditation, of course. But it's not something you can easily put into words to get to it. But yes, so that's the other thing that lies sort of underlying all of this, is this yeast-like phenomenon. Once you recognize that there is always in your experience a non-conceptual element, always, it has a yeast-like effect on the rest of your experience. You say, oh my God, so you mean everywhere? Yeah, everywhere. It's always there. In fact, that non-conceptual element is the real thing. Everything else is constructed on top of it. So we're literally living in a construct on top of a ground we never see. And so again, this is a very big moment when this starts happening. So yeah, that's it. I don't think there are any other, learning to look. What are your thoughts on the idea that sentient beings on Earth are were likely there when the universe came out, not just by luck, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, there is a mechanical and a non-mechanical element to experience. We are the living proof of it. And there's nothing wrong with it. Galen Strawson, great philosopher, used to say materialism is underrated. Perhaps materialism contains within it sentience. There's no reason why materialism can't be sentient. That's not eradicated by materialism. Physicalism eradicates it, materialism doesn't. So personally, I'm a panpsychist. If I pushed into a philosophical position, I'd say, well, panpsychism is the way to go. But sentience is innate in some profound way. And this innateness is what we're trying to understand about our own incarnation. And again, there are many, many, many passages and revelations of mind where this is addressed. Our innate capacity to know underlies our conceptual knowing. And it's this innate capacity that we're interested in discovering. So when Rilke talks about this and he says, the mind is but a visitor. It thinks us out of our world. Each mind fabricates itself. And then says, you make of yourself an offering. I don't want to think of a place for you. You speak to me from everywhere. Ooh, Very good.
Mm.
Very good.
Mm.
I've never seen that. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm not a great poet. I quote Wordsworth to the class sometimes, but I've never done Rilke. And indeed, what I do know is that Rilke and Goethe and Naturphilosophy were the final attempt to maintain the medieval worldview in the light of modern mechanical philosophy. It was their final attempt. You know, by the early 19th century, the counter-reformational objectification of experience had really gathered steam. And Goethe and Rilke were the last two trying to create a new world science, Naturphilosophy, which contained consciousness as an element in the world. And, you know, for a brief period it worked with Göttingen and all that, but it failed. Steiner, I suppose, going forward, you can see traces of it. But of course, the mainstream culture moved on into making iPhones. And you can see how it happened. So this was the last cry, really. Mm-hmm. Beautiful poem, my God, wonderful. So that's my introduction to Revelations of Mind, guys. By all means, ask me anything you want about the book or whatever. I'm here for you. But as I say, I think it's extremely important. And you know, I studied history and philosophy of science, along with being a philosopher and being a scientist, and I ran a business for a while as well. And I honestly, deeply believe this book has a very important message. And you can see how our culture just oscillates between the objective and the subjective without ever really understanding either properly. And we've really got to get a grip on this. So this is not anti-science at all. It's not in any way claiming that, you know, there's no Pluto or something. It's just saying, guys, the Pluto that we know about comes through this. If we don't know this, there's not a whole lot of point knowing about Pluto, really. Yeah. Or perhaps put better, if we do know this, then what we know about Pluto is that much more important. So, you know, I really deeply believe that we have to reform our educational structure. And that means making a case for absolute subjectivity. That the subject matters. And if you write the subject out of your equations and you write the subject out of your knowledge system, you land up with a catastrophic failure. And of course, one sees it as one takes one's beautiful young children into school and see what comes out the other end. It's shocking and getting worse. And the alienation is deep and profound. And, you know, I have this metaphor, which I hope you understood in the book, which I'm rather proud of, called the three-card trick. How Galilean logic wrote the subject out of the equation. And this is literally a trick. It's called suppositional logic. It's one of the main engines of discovery that we use to generate the scientific method. And suppositional logic takes understood experience, objectifies it into perfect and non-existent entities, and then reconstructs it as something understood, normally with factors in the equations to make them match experience. And that process writes the individual out of the equation. So for example, I went to Berkeley's great because, you know, because of public university. And so I went to an undergraduate class on time given by a quantum mechanical physicist who worked with Stephen Hawking, big name apparently. So I go to this thing and he's talking about time. He said something really interesting. He said, what is time? Time is what clocks tell us. What do clocks do? They tell time, which I thought was pretty insightful. But he then went on to talk about how our astronomical knowledge has changed from Ptolemy, where of course the sun went round the earth, to Kepler, or to Copernicus, where the earth went around the sun, to Kepler with the epicycles, to Newton. And he was trying to claim this was something to do with mathematics. And I said to him, don't you realize, I was naughty, I asked a question. I said, excuse me, don't you realize the difference between Ptolemy and Copernicus is that Ptolemaic astronomy is entirely based in the first person experience. Kepler is not. Kepler places the observer outside the universe, looking at it. That's the change. He completely nonplussed by my question. Just thought I was mad. Because to him, that's just bullshit. He's got no idea what the hell I'm talking about. Yet to me, that is such a big thing, that metaphysical change. And that's happened across all our knowledge systems. So Nicholas Oresme, with the movement of grace in the heart.
That's so beautiful.
What is that now? Poetry, maybe? I don't know. Art, we call it. Yeah. That's what's happened to us.
Just that sequence of those three metaphors of a ball rolling down the plane, the ripening of an apple, the movement of grace in the heart. To hold those together, that's so extraordinary.
Well, it's not really when you think about it. It exists to us. But if you were in a world where you were absolutely present, then it would just be, these are all examples of movement.
Yeah.
This is what we've lost. We've lost ourselves. We're just looking in. Yeah. And so this is very much what Revelations addresses all the time. Keeps coming back to it. Yeah. Now, of course, it's a course. You know, it's very structured. So, you know, it's hard to see the wood for the trees often. I'm sorry, it just is. And it's because Rimshay is not an English writer, and the people who were transcribing him didn't understand what he was talking about. So sometimes the thread of meaning is kind of buried in the prose. It can be hard to find it because it's not clear. Now, this has an upside and a downside. The upside is that you have this kind of, well, I'm a great fan of Tarkovsky. It's a bit like a Tarkovsky movie where you kind of go into this realm of weirdness. And, you know, if you survive it, you're kind of changed at the end and you don't know why. That's actually not a bad thing to happen because you're trying to go beyond concept. But of course, what I've tried to do in the commentary is show the silver thread, which I have detected. Now, I must say, everybody who teaches Revelations teaches it a different way. And every time I teach it a different way, which means that there's more than one silver thread. There are probably many. And of course, this goes back to what the book is really saying. Ultimately, your subjectivity and my subjectivity are different. There's not one subjectivity. There are as many subjects as there are sentient beings. So there are many, many, many ways to understand revelations of mind. There's not a single understanding at all. The only thing that's common between them all is to recognize that a major element of our cognition is mechanical, and that mechanical cognitive structure is reflexive, and in its reflexivity, it creates a prison. But what you do when you get out of prison is your business. Your absolute subjectivity. Yeah. And this is very Buddhist, because remember, there are millions of Buddhas and they're all different. This is a fundamental difference between Buddhism and, again, every other religion. Buddhism does not believe there is a single destination. There are as many destinations as there are sentient beings. They're all going to be Buddhas, but they're all going to be different. And that's very Buddhist as well.
Richard, I wanted to get back. Maybe that's, I think about when the Buddhism talks about 84,000 ways of understanding. That means, of course, that's a way to say it, but that kind of reminds me of what you're talking about right now.
Of course, that's not metaphoric, you know, the 84,000.
Metaphor, yes.
You know, it's medical. It's based on, well, it's medical.
Yeah.
It's based upon this idea that ultimately we're made up of nadis, which are channels, which are informed by prana, which is energy, upon which our mind, bindu, rides. And there are 84,000 nadis. So the combination of these 84,000 channels creates the individual. So that's why it's always said Buddha taught 84,000 ways of liberation. It's actually it's not not a random number. It's actually based in this deep teaching about body energy, which again, Western culture has lost, although some Asian cultures still retain it, at least in part. But yeah, that's what it's based on. Sorry, hey,
Muted, Newcomb.
Your mic's off, man. I can see your mouth moving. That's about as far as it goes.
But you're blocked.
No, you still got your mic off. Yeah. Good.
How about now?
Yeah, good, John.
Okay, I wanted to ask you quite a while ago when you were talking about some of the different backgrounds of thinking that you went through on your book. And I wanted to ask you if you ever ran into the story of the monkey that supposedly is one of the oldest things that were put from folk tales into an actual story about how Buddhism went from India to China.
You mean
and the monkey?
The monkey
was taken out of the Stone Mountain because he stole a peach from the garden of eternity or whatever it's called, where they couldn't kill him, so they had to lock him up in a mountain. It's like a 4,000-year-old story.
I'm sorry, it's news to me. I've never heard that before.
You've never heard of the monkey? How Buddhism was taken by a priest from India to China?
Well, yeah, it was. Well, there were a series of translators that went to China. Kumaravija in the 2nd century, up to Xuanzang in the 6th century. So it was kind of overlapping.
I think it was Arthur Waley was the one that I wrote. I think I have a copy of it somewhere hidden in my very small library.
I must say, I
wanted to know if you actually had any connection between that story and the funny way it was explaining different qualities of people as they traveled from village to village on their way from India to China. And
like Chinese whispers, you mean? A bit like that?
Yeah, the personal traits were in the people that they ran into, and how they related it to the different human concepts and abilities and stuff, and how they acted with each other. It was a very interesting book.
Yeah, I actually don't know it. I'm not particularly expert on Chinese Buddhism. What's interesting about Buddhist history is as we gradually make the translations, I mean, we're in a position now in modernity where we have access to more Buddhist material than anybody ever had before. And we're now cross-translating. And so we can now begin to make a map. And it's clear that there were successive waves of translation into China. And each time they made a wave of translation, they took a kind of snapshot of where Indian Buddhism was at the time. So you can kind of reconstruct Indian Buddhism from the waves of translation that are preserved in cultures that did a better job of preserving it than the Indians did, who managed to destroy it all in typical Indian style. But nonetheless, you can see how it developed. But beyond that, I don't know this story.
Did the Tibetan version come from China as well?
No. What happened in Tibet was that there were 3 waves of translation, or maybe 2, but certainly 2. The first one happened in the 8th century when, for some reason, well, I know the reason, but there was an empire, a Tibetan empire, that was actually really big. It was a sort of precursor of the Mongol Empire. Horse warriors, terrifying, efficient warriors. And they'd conquered all the way to Chang'an, which was the capital of China at the time, about halfway to Beijing, and the whole of the Himalayan plateau. And they decided they wanted to get culture because, they were barbarians basically, but they ran a huge empire. And so they said, let's get Buddhism. It's the premier culture. So a king basically allocated a substantial amount of the booty that they'd been getting in their conquests to a translation effort, and essentially translated every book they could find in northern India in about the 8th century. So it's the equivalent of some foreign race coming to America and translating the Library of Congress. It was like bonkers. And they did this for over a period of about 80 years, and that's called the first translation period. And then the empire collapsed, and then about 150 years later, a second wave of translations started in much smaller scale. And again, what you see with these translations is snapshot of where Indian culture was, because the first translations preserve the cultural root in about the 6th, 7th century, and then the later schools, and so the first translation school is called the Nyingma school, which is what Tarthanf Tulku is in Nyingma. And then the second waves of translations came about 150, 200 years later, and they variously created the Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug schools. And they have later translations, often with developments or even completely new things, which means that the Indian culture was extraordinarily fertile. It was producing a very, very rich cultural display. And so the various translations capture snapshots of it. That's what happens. And so, you know, we're now able to reconstruct what was happening in India. And this all goes back to the Buddha himself, because the Buddha said, look, guys, what I'm teaching you now, which is kind of preserved in the Pali Canon mainly, but Pali Canon is already 300 or 400 years after the Buddha's demise, really. Although it's, because it was never written down, you see, it was all oral. And so, you know, but the Pali Canon written form is about 400 years after the Buddha. So there's the Pali Canon, which was preserved. And the reason that was preserved is it went to southern India and then into Sri Lanka, and so escaped the catastrophic invasions of the Muslims, which eventually destroyed Buddhist India and the Brahmanical follow through. So they kept an early canon. There were actually 18 early canons, and they've got little bits of the Savastavadan canon as well. And then what happened was that gradually the difficult points, the so-called vitula, which were points that the Buddha kind of alluded to, like, you know, monks, what happens when there's no one in this room? It is empty, monks. The mind is empty. Can we go and have lunch now? That was it. You know, and there's just a one line like that. And then that turns into a massive efflorescence of writing later on, as meditator monks work with this idea and develop it and all the rest of it. And that's the Buddha encouraged that. He said, you guys are going to meditate and think about what I've told you and find new things, and that's perfectly okay. And it's all right to develop this. You know, this is not a fixed canon. It was all clearly stated. So the Mahayana school is essentially a development of the difficult points within the original canon. And then the skillful means, which is another very important Buddhist concept, of how you might develop new modes of perception, etc., develop into what we call Tantra. And so you land up with these 3 phases in a very rich kind of something that we've really never replicated in the West, partly in medieval culture, but the church was always really controlling in a way that didn't happen in Buddhist India, where the emperors and kings were incredibly broad-minded and really liked the development of spiritual life. It was just part of the culture. So there was a big mixture of Greek culture that came in, very important Greek influence, which is why we find Buddhism so attractive, because it actually has a similar root to our own culture. And also this very rich and unrestrained development, which led in the end to Tantra, as I say, and little snapshots of it are preserved in more rigid cultures like the Chinese culture, where, you know, there was always imperial control and they were a lot more worried about what it was, but they kept better records. So we've learned more about Buddhist India from the Tang emperors than we have from anyone else, because the Indians lost it all. Yeah, a little bit from the Sri Lankans, but mainly from the Tang emperors. But I don't know the monkey. Sorry, I don't know that one. But what is wonderful is that modern scholarship is doing an incredible job of reconstructing this knowledge system. And It's remarkable. It just is. It is remarkable. It really, and almost unknown, because Western philosophers say, "Oh, it's religious, so we'll put it in religious studies." But actually, they got to Hume in the 2nd century. It's embarrassing, actually. I mean, honestly, it's embarrassing how Western philosophers are ignorant of this kind of thing. You know, the Indians were so far ahead. It was absurd. And you know, so there's a big blind spot that is gradually ending. Increasingly, Western philosophers are willing to admit that there's something in Indian philosophy that's worth looking at, but we're still a long way to go. And to give you an idea of the task involved, there are about 23 million books in the Library of Congress in English. There are about 14 million Buddhist texts, of which only 3% are in translation. In fact, the Buddhist commentarial literature is bigger than the commentarial literature of every other religion combined. It's just crazy. Mm. It's literally like, you know, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when the spaceship puts the little thing up above the mountain and then up it goes. Oh my God. It's like that. It's like, my God, what is this thing? It's huge. But it all comes back, and the cutting edge of it is this: mind is everything. Everything. Because there is nothing you experience that's not mind. Mind is everything. Westerners find this very difficult. But mind is everything.
Even that little mind.
Yeah. But no, but you see, this is it. We experience that cat through what? Through our minds.
Right. Yep.
Mind is everything. And this is a really big realization that you know, it takes us time, because our whole education system points out. It always talks about things as if they exist separate from us. Richard, whether they do or don't, we will never know.
You mentioned a poem by Rilke, but I didn't catch the title of.
Oh well, forgive me. It was sent by one of you.
Oh,
yeah. Who I've got to thank.
I sent it. It's from the Book of Hours.
It's
absolutely. The collection is called the Book of Hours.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely beautiful poem.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
And as I say, I sometimes quote Wordsworth Ode to Immortality.
Yes.
Which has similar intuitions to this, yes. But this is far more precise in terms of what it's pointing to. So look, I mean, I'm really deeply impressed that there is a reading group trying to undertake what you're doing. And I hope very much you are, you know, getting the idea of revelations, and that's what I'm very minded to make sure today. Yeah, at least my idea of revelations. Of course, you can have your own, but you know, I really want to feel. I'd feel unhappy if, you know, I hadn't managed to communicate a key theme here. And I think the first section,
very helpful.
Well, the first section is a tour de force about what the regime of mind is. And what I would like to do is show you a movie. Can I show you a 3-minute movie? I'm going to share my screen. You probably have to make me no, I can share the screen.
I don't know.
There you go.
Do I have to give you permission? Let me see.
Am I sharing now?
Yeah, you are. Good.
Well, look at this movie. Now, basically, the background to this is reaction time. So, you know, we all know snakes and mongooses. It takes time for animals to react. And indeed, we are fooled by the display. Now, this is a really important point. Conscious input does not arise until at least 200 milliseconds after stimuli arrive. Now, 200 milliseconds is click, click. Why then do we not knock everything over? Because the brain compensates for its own processing time in the representations of input that it constructs. So if we go to pick up a coffee cup, Our arm moves to pick up the coffee cup before we know it's moving. Now, when this was first discovered, physiologists said, oh, there you are, it proves there's no such thing as free will because our body's moving before we know it. Not at all. What it's showing is a delay, a device to enable us to think we're in the here and now when actually we're 200 milliseconds behind it the whole time. It's a very nice piece of kit, this, I tell you. And that's how we can work in the world. Because, of course, when you pick up a coffee cup, you've got to actually pick up the cup, not be 200 milliseconds behind your fingers. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. So clearly, there is a delay mechanism. Now, of course, this is all measured in laboratories. But there's a film on the internet that is an absolute trip, and it's this film.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this, yeah.
Now, you may have seen it, Alan. I know some of you will see it. This film is a film about some poor guy walking across a college quadrangle in Georgia in the rain, and it's taken by a security camera. And he's walking, he's doing, I took a stopwatch out to watch him walking, and he's walking at about 2 steps a second, and he's hit by lightning. And you saw the flash then, and he runs off. Now, if you slow down the film and go frame by frame, it's really, really interesting. So here he is walking. Now, each one of these steps is about 500 milliseconds. Bang! There's the present moment. Lightning. I mean, you know, it's really quite dramatic. You can actually see the lightning flash, and then it whites out the screen. There's the present moment. So what happens? Well, bang. As we go on, he keeps walking. This guy here has been struck by lightning, but he's walking perfectly normally. Look at him. We're now 500 milliseconds after the lightning strike, about 400, 500 milliseconds. He's still walking along, umbrella up, thinking about the weather. Nothing's happened. Then suddenly, he starts curling. Ooh, I've been hit by lightning, and runs off. Now, that's a real thing. Bang, and then nothing, then curl. Now, we don't realize this. That is a substantial delay. And that's a lightning strike. That's not like a itching on your ear or something. That's a life-threatening event that's occurred to this guy. And he doesn't see it. Now, this is what we're living in.
There's been a lot of people that have been hit by lightning, and only a good percentage of them, or just like what happened to him, where it actually was grounded through your wet clothes or something else, and it didn't really go through your heart or anything. So
no, this guy isn't killed either. It doesn't actually hit him if you actually look. It goes right beside him. So he must have just got the slight shock, slight shock, a big shock, I'm sure. But I mean, if you actually look, it lands on the grass. But he's very, very lucky, this guy. Look at his look. Go back.
What's astonishing, the timing.
He's holding an umbrella.
Yeah.
But the strike actually hits the grass beside him there.
Yeah.
He's very, very lucky. But nonetheless, the striking thing is the time it takes him to react.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here he is, he's been hit, and he's walking along, and there is nothing happening.
Wow.
And then he curls up. Now, I can't tell you how significant that is. That is really, really significant. Because what it shows is that we are behind events by a non-trivial amount. It's about click, 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 behind anything. So when we talk about be here now, it's an utter fabrication. We are never here now. Cannot be here now. Not possible. Just nonsense. Don't even think about being here now. But this doesn't say that we're just machines. But it sets up a question we then must ask. What the hell is our experience? And scientific materialism can give us very helpful insights into this. It can. But we need to work with our experience in a systematic way to make sense of it. Otherwise, it's just stuff out there. And so every bookshop's got 500 books on 101 ways to be happy, written by some neurophysiologist. It's utter nonsense. What do they know about being happy? They're just boffins. We need to understand ourselves how to be happy. Something totally different. And our culture completely says that's not possible. Ever since Galileo, subjectivity's, something that religious people do. Yeah. And this is very unfortunate. So that's really the big thing. And I find it very exciting. I think it's I think if one can make the case for why subjective knowledge is valid, it has important implications for our culture. The last thing I'd say on that is that there are occasions where subjective knowledge can be shown to be valid. Of course, one of the examples is the ubiquitous evidence from ancient culture, where the ancients had technologies which they developed without apparently having technology. And the examples of this are numerous. And, I'm sure you all know about them. I mean, there are just so many of them, where clearly ancient people were able to develop very sophisticated technology without having any physics or anything, really. They just did it somehow. The one I like most of all is the use by the 2nd century Buddhist Indian culture of a ground seed called Mercuna Purions to treat Parkinson's disease. Now, Parkinson's disease is a relatively rare disease, and it only happens in the elderly. So in 2nd century India, how many old people had uncontrollable tremor? God knows, not many. Yet they recorded precisely the use of ground Mercuna Purions seed to treat it. What does that contain? 1% L-DOPA. How the hell did they work that out? How is that possible? Did they literally line up tremory old people and give them every single plant till they found something that worked? I mean, what are we talking about here? How can a culture have made that discovery prior to pharmacology, prior to chemistry, prior to physiology, prior to any of our seemingly objective ways of understanding the world? There has to be something else that they were using. What is it? And of course, this is true whether you talk about the pyramids or the iron smelting in Sri Lanka. I mean, there's so many examples of this. There's clearly another knowledge system that we've lost. And indeed, that's another theme that comes up later in Revelations of 9, about what that might be and how there might be another way of accessing our experience to give us knowledge that's not analytical in the way we are educated. There may be non-analytical knowledge. Again, huge discovery. Oh my God. So
sometimes analysis is just a confirmation of natural laws that come along, and now you can prove it with an analysis.
Of course, that's exactly what analysis is. But the thing is, when you look at the sophistication of some of these ancient technologies, you're left going, how did they do that? There's no evidence of scientific experimentation of any sort. And yet they could take ground Mercuna Purions and treat Parkinson's disease. How? How did they get there? We can now see it works. They're using the state-of-the-art medicine. It works very well. How? And, people say, I don't care. Oh, it's a big thing to care about.
Is that a chemical or a natural substance that you're...
Mercuna Purions is a bush, a wild bush that grows in India. L-DOPA is the pharmaceutical agent we use to treat Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease was discovered by an 18th century doctor called Parkinson, 1,600 years after they're diagnosed and treated in India. Maybe we should call it Nagarjuna's disease, because that was the...
I wanted to put offer something on that same vein. Maybe it's not quite the same, but the wayfinders out in the Pacific Islands out there, they could get all over the place. Okay. And how did they do that? How did they figure that out? And you said, well, they sent guys out, and those who came back told them. And the ones who didn't come back didn't tell them. I mean, but how did they get back? How did they do all this? So there was this internal knowledge that it's hard to understand how they were able to go all over the Pacific, all these different cultures.
Well, the answer is it's non-conceptual.
Yes.
The answer is our natural intelligence is far more powerful than we think. We just live in a culture that systematically downgrades it.
Yeah, there's natural medicines all around the world.
There are natural medicines all around the world, of course. I used to run a pharmaceutical company dedicated to look at them. Astonishing, the medical systems around the world. Astonishingly effective too. And you're left going, my God, you mean there's another whole way of being which doesn't require analysis in the way we understand it? Wow, what's that? Jeez. Big, man.
Animals know so much of these things.
They do, and indeed there are called the lemurs in Madagascar. There's evidence that there are lemur doctors. There are lemurs that have been shown with collections of herbs, and other lemurs come and see them and they dole them out. Yeah, so there's actually evidence of medicine going back into because of course lemurs are sentient. I mean, it's not, this is not in any way anthropocentric. All animals are sentient. Their sentience is perhaps more limited than ours, but sentience itself has a magical quality. Yes. And it's that we're really trying to understand. What do we mean by sentience? Yeah. And so we're now getting to the really deep level, which Revelations of Mind is systematically working its way towards. What do we mean by Homo sapiens? What do we mean by all this stuff? It's not just logic. And, so another book I'd like to write, maybe one day will, is an encyclopedia of common sense. Because if you were to add together all the examples of common sense that there were, you make a very big book. And in no case is there evidence of calculation. But somehow they get to flying buttresses. I don't know, they just do. And that's very, very interesting because it points to something that we're losing, and it's craft. It's craft.
Goes right along with lemming birth control.
Yeah, a bit like, yeah. And we're losing key elements of our human experience. And so, of course, I think, realizing this and realizing that this stuff isn't just old wives' tale. And, people always say, oh, personal experiences. Hardly a day goes past you don't read, oh, someone, there was a car accident and a bystander said this, another bystander said that, but of course, personal recollection is unreliable. That's just the trope. Not the case. I'll give you a really good example. Epic of Gilgamesh was recorded by Victorian ethnographers in the 1850s as a story told by these storytellers on the Turkish plains. They used to have storytellers who go around. And then they dug up Nineveh, found the tablets, and to their astonishment, it was identical. They had retained the Epic of Gilgamesh for 2,500 years in an oral tradition. So, every now and then you get a little glimpse of, wow, you mean there's another capacity of mind that we don't know about? Whoa, what's that? This is all Revelations of Mind, all of it.
I apologize, I have to go along. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. No, I've overrun, guys, and so look, anytime, if by all means work your way through. If you accumulate more queries or stuff that doesn't make any sense, or, nudge Alan, and we can do another session, or indeed drop me an email. Yeah. But obviously, probably best to accumulate stuff. Whatever you want to do, anyway. I'm just delighted you're doing it. So, have a look at Dharma College. We also run courses if you want to study more formally. But I'm delighted you're doing a reading group. That's so cool. Because a reading group is a really good way to do it. But if you want to study more formally, We actually have quite formal classes in these books. Dharma-college.com, Alan knows it. It's only just down the road in Berkeley. Well, it's online, of course, because everything's on Zoom now. So we're
Thank you so
online.
much. Thank
Richard,
you.
I really want to thank you for coming. It was so important. It really is going to give us a shot in the arm, you might say, to with our little book club, to continue on with a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more, or quite a bit more understanding.
Well, that's great, wonderful. And hello, John. I see you've come online now. I hope you've only.
Oh, he's here.
There he is.
I have been here for a while.
Were you paying attention? This is my grandson, by the way, so I have to ask him, did you pay attention?
I have been. I've been here the whole time, and
the
brain is blown. Holy cow!
All right, good to have some young people into this. Thank you for that.
Well, it's really wonderful too to know that we can call on you as we work our way through things periodically. It's just been wonderful to hear you speak, and I have just taken all kinds of notes, and I have so much to think about as a result of what you've said. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure, and please, anytime, guys, just give me a buzz.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, I think we'll sign off.
Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.